Starfield is a good game. Let's just establish that real quick before we get into everything else. It's got hundreds of hours of content, an extremely cool art style, and for the most part, it functions. It works. If all you're really looking for in Starfield is just another Bethesda game that specializes in being a Bethesda game and absolutely nothing else, then I have some wonderful news for you. This may be exactly what you've been wanting, but just know that that's all that you're gonna get. There is nothing more to Starfield. In fact, in some ways, it almost feels like Starfield is trying its absolute hardest not to innovate on Bethesda's formula, while even regressing in some aspects. It's okay, because Bethesda has always been like this. They don't need to improve on their formula, it's perfect. It's my fault for having too high of expectations. Expectations that a studio who have always been known for innovating and creating groundbreaking experiences would strive to do the same again, especially with a new IP. That's set in space. But I guess that's just too much to ask for from a studio that is held in some of the highest regard in the industry. Gaming is forever saved, guys. Bethesda did it again, woohoo! And look, again, as I said, Starfield isn't exactly bad. It's just so painfully safe. Bethesda at this point is well aware that they can just release another game with their logo on it and it'll print money and win all the awards in the world. And for the most part, it seems like it's been a success. It hasn't been a disaster, there's been no insane controversy, and for the most part, the general public seems to love it. It's going great for Bethesda and Microsoft right now. I'll admit, I was absolutely singing this game's praise and dodging any criticism with a strong amount of coat because it's an RPG in space, and I love space. It was all sounding like my ideal game in my head. Even on my initial playthrough of the game, I was actively ignoring glaring problems because, once again, it's in space and, come on, it's Bethesda. But the more I play, the less I can ignore the problems. I really was rooting for this game, and I went in the most positive I could be, and somehow came out feeling like this. Most of my issues can be boiled down to three main things: exploration, story, and combat. These are what I would consider to be the three main pillars of not just a Bethesda game, but pretty much any open world game, and unfortunately, all three greatly struggle here. Oh, also, massive spoilers for the entire game. I'm not gonna put any more spoiler warnings up from this point on. I'm gonna be talking about the game and all the spoilery content like it's normal, so just be warned, because this is it. Alright, before I complain about the game and sound like the greatest armchair developer of all time, well, let's be positive. Being positive is fun. Because as I said, Starfield is not a bad game by any means. I mean, it's a game with a realistic space setting, so already that gains points from me. I'm a complete sucker for settings and aesthetics like that. I mean, Interstellar is probably my favorite movie ever made, so you guys see what I mean. Well, it's either that or Army of Darkness, but those are such wildly different movies. Starfield goes for what Bethesda calls NASA punk, and I love it. The standard Constellation suit alone feels so futuristic yet also grounded. Like, I could see this genuinely being an evolution of the classic spacesuits we all know. All the other suits in the game too have such a strong attention to detail and purpose. Mining suit doesn't really look the coolest, but that's not its purpose. It's for mining, and it looks like it's made for mining. Then there's stuff like the Starborn suits, which, I mean, yeah, those do just exist to look cool, but whatever. Honestly, the only suit I really don't like is the Mantis suit. God, that thing is putrid. The NASA punk aesthetic also extends to the ships and ship interiors. Every single detail in these ships is modeled with so much fidelity that you can actually feel the love and agony that went into designing and modeling these ships. Everything once again feels so incredibly futuristic, while still feeling a little retro in some ways. It's very clear that these ships are designed to feel like homes. I always love boarding massive pirate ships and just seeing how detailed and lived in they are. Like, they're laid out like actual living spaces. And on the topic of ships, the shipbuilder is just, it's good. I'll admit, I'm too stupid to properly use it, but I appreciate its existence. I love when games just let you create some silly doohickeys, some real thingamabobs, if you will. It also helps that ship combat is also a lot of fun. I've seen people complain that it's too simple, but I don't really mind it. For me, it's the right combination of arcadey while also still having at least some depth to it, so I like it. My favorite thing to do is to use the targeting skill, lock onto an enemy's ships, and then click every single fire button imaginable. The amount of lasers and rockets you can shoot at once is almost comical. I love it. Just please remove the weapon limitation, please. Plus, if you don't deatomize the enemy ship, you can board it. and kill everyone inside and steal it. The amount of time and effort that Bethesda put into the design of the ships and just really letting them feel personal to you is amazing. Honestly, it'd just be a shame if the ships were nothing more than a glorified outpost that only exists as a gateway to random space encounters. It sure would suck a lot, wouldn't it? And of course, I can't deny that even though I'm gonna complain a ton later, the classic Bethesda loop is in full force in this game, and it is addicting. Once you get sucked into it, it's great, it's fun. But there's also so much about Starfield that pulls you out of that loop so fast and ruins it. It's all great until the magic wears off, and the dread finally sets in. Alright, enough positivity. Now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for, the negativity. And again, it really does hurt to have to be this harsh on the game because I was really rooting for it, but Bethesda should do better because I know that they can do better. There are just so many decisions in this game that I don't understand. I think it's best to get my biggest criticism out of the way, something so huge that it's the center of almost every debate with this game. Wars have been fought, lives have been lost, and nations have been brought to their knees over one topic: the exploration. Yes, this one topic has been the main dividing point between players. And that's for good reason. Exploration is such an important part of these games, and it's what ties all the systems together. It's what drives the game forward and makes everything feel cohesive. It's the simple satisfaction of seeing something off in the distance and being like, oh hey, that's cool, and heading towards it just to get wrapped up in some random quest along the way. And it's not just about dangling cool things in the distance for players to find, it's also about the world feeling alive and real and keeping the player immersed. Immersion is so important to this genre, and I feel like that's always been Bethesda's strong suit. Wherever they lacked, they never lacked in world immersion. Well, as I'm sure you know, Starfield fails at this aspect so incredibly hard, and it's kinda depressing to see. It's the kind of thing where the more I think about it, the more I wonder,
what the fuck were they thinking?
there are two main types of exploration in Starfield: the space exploration that consists of jumping to systems in hope of getting a random encounter, and the ground exploration, where you walk around an empty planet and think to yourself, oh, well, technically I'm exploring because I've never been here before, even though you'll rarely ever find anything interesting. Honestly, the best part about exploration is the backdrops you usually get, because space is so fucking awesome, and Bethesda has a pretty cool lighting system that takes into consideration the kind of star a system has and how far the planet is from said star. This game is pure screenshot bait, and the amount of times I've gone to a planet just to kind of look up and be like, oh, that's pretty, and then leave. Other than that though, exploration feels pointless. Okay. I'm sorry, to Starfield's credit, there are resources on the planets as well as points of interest. This is where the handcrafted content comes into play. Initially, I'd assumed that Bethesda had a system in place to help keep these points of interest feeling semi-new. Maybe they randomize them a bit, just something to keep things interesting. I was actually surprised at how detailed some of these areas were until I realized that, it's the same thing every time. Now, of course, obviously they can't handcraft content for thousands of planets. I don't think anyone expected that, but I also don't think it's unfair to think that there would be some kind of system in place to help offset this. Some kind of generation system that goes beyond just plopping a couple prefabricated structures around and calling it a day. Seriously, they are just prefabs, the layouts don't even change. Now, of course, space is very empty, and this has been the argument for the boring exploration, which could be fair until you realize that every planet has human structures on them. So it's not like you're just exploring some new planet. People have been here before, even the ones with mysterious alien temples that are apparently previously undiscovered. It almost feels like Bethesda is crutching on the fact that the game is set in space, than actually using the fact that the game is in space. Todd Howard has said something along the lines of, oh, well, when the astronauts went up to the moon, it was dull, but they weren't bored. Todd, this is a fucking video game. You can have your barren resource-heavy planets, but there need to be more settled planets with actual content on them. I don't know, give us like a couple of smaller but like really cool maps, and then we just have all these extra planets for modding playgrounds and resources. That'd be great. This game also leans into more of a looter shooter aspect, so maybe repeating the various outposts could have been an incentive for some kind of cool, unique world drop weapons. Now, that would require them to make unique weapons, but that's a discussion for later. Getting to these points of interest as well is also such a chore because there's no vehicles. I was also someone who defended this because Bethesda implied that the boost pack would be more than enough to get you where you want. It's not. It's also bad for an immersion factor because are you telling me that humanity has colonized the stars but doesn't have ground vehicles? What? So not only is exploration incredibly unrewarding, but it's also tedious as hell. The thing though that really ties together just how bad the exploration is in this game is how disjointed everything feels due to fast travel being your main source of travel. And before you say, oh, this isn't No Man's Sky or Star Citizen, so what did you expect? It's an RPG. And yeah, of course Starfield is first and foremost a Bethesda RPG, but that's kind of the problem here. Starfield isn't No Man's Sky, but it sure as hell feels like it wants to be. To me, it kind of feels like Bethesda just cut out like a third of the game and then tried to replace it with another game. The reason why No Man's Sky can pull off the open space exploration approach is not only just because you can seamlessly fly your ship up into space and then land it on a planet, it's because it's tied directly into the core of the game. All of No Man's Sky's systems are built off of having a vast universe to explore. There's gotta be reasons to land on planets. There's resources you need to get, you need to refuel, it's tied to the economy. The game actively pushes you to land on planets and do things like collect resources or search for outposts. I'm not saying that No Man's Sky does this perfectly by any means, but the core of the game still pushes you to these planets. It's what the entire game is completely designed around. That's also the problem, is that you kind of have to commit to something like this. You can't just slap 1,000 generated planets into a game and think that it'll have the same effect as games like No Man's Sky. That's what we're seeing here with Starfield. I wouldn't be surprised if some point in development they did have plans to just have a couple maps, but someone at Bethesda saw No Man's Sky and for some reason thought, hey guys, scrap all of that, we need to do 1,000 generated planets. If we don't, we're gonna be the laughingstock of the gaming industry. But then after that, it didn't go any further. Bethesda, for whatever reason, didn't feel the need to commit to this kind of exploration, which is understandable because you do need so many systems and moving parts to get something like this working, but they didn't go through with it. They didn't commit to it. They just plopped 1,000 generated planets, gave it some stuff to generate, and called it a day. My guess is that initially the planets were more tied to the game systems, but Bethesda didn't want to overwhelm the player and they wanted to keep it more casual. We already know that not only was fuel cut from the game, but we're starting to learn that planet environments were a lot more hostile and possibly even required multiple suits to have. It seems that there were more survival elements at some point, and this would have helped push you towards the generated planets. There would be other reasons to go and gather resources than just meaningless crafting, but all of that was stripped away and now this is what we're left with. Bethesda not innovating on the exploration that they are so known for, and instead just trying to be No Man's Sky, without committing to the systems that are needed to make something like that work. I would not be surprised if sometime in the next year we get a survival mode for Starfield, and that infinitely makes things better. But for now, this is what we've got. I sure hope that being able to say that you have 1,000 planets in your game when the marketing was worth it, because it may be great from a marketing perspective, but from a gameplay perspective, it's terrible. Another argument I hear defending the lack of space travel is that it would get tedious. It is so much better being able to fast travel everywhere. You'd get so bored of flying. Now this argument is usually reliant on the person making it, hoping that you won't comprehend the super innovative feature of having both systems in the game. Fast travel isn't a bold creative choice, it's a fucking convenience. I've also seen the argument that you wouldn't want to sit there just traveling for hours just to get to one planet. You know, ignoring the fact that it's a video game and you can speed up travel, but whatever. Hey, the astronauts traveled hours to the moon. They weren't bored. You know, really thinking about it, Starfield doesn't even have any classic Bethesda step-out moments. But what it could have had was fly-in moments. As I mentioned before, Bethesda has created a very in-depth lighting system for the planets, and oh my god, it would shine with a system like this. No pun intended. Letting you actually manually descend onto a planet's surface would just be incredible with the tech that Bethesda has put into the lighting. I mean, seriously, the views that you would get as you descended to a planet would just be stunning. New Atlantis is apparently the largest city Bethesda has ever made, and what would be a better way to show it off than have you fly in and see the entire city from above? People would be talking about that for years. Feels like the goal of modern open world games is to try and eliminate as many loading screens as possible. Starfield instead goes back on all of that. And honestly, I don't think it's a problem of Bethesda not being skilled enough, but it's probably more an issue with the engine. Starfield's scope just seems to be way too big for what the creation engine can handle. It seems like the biggest upgrades to it were the graphics and physics, and I will admit a lot of the physics function pretty well. But other than that, the engine still has the exact same problems it's always had. I also wouldn't be surprised if COVID affected this game tremendously. But overall, I think the creation engine just wasn't able to handle it, and for whatever reason, Bethesda decided it either wasn't worth the time or money to try and pull something like this off. And it's sad because I feel like if any studio could do it, it's Bethesda. And pulling it off would be a huge technical achievement and show that Bethesda is moving forward with the times. In an interview after the game's launch, Todd Howard even said that they bit off more than they could chew. Going from an open world game set in Boston to an entire galaxy is quite a big jump. And apparently there was a point in development when COVID hit that they weren't even sure the game would come out. I feel like I'm left wondering what the initial plans with Starfield were, because it's very clear that things got hit hard and changed a lot. Honestly, the quote of wondering if the game would even ever come out kind of puts a lot of this game's shortcomings into perspective, because everything got hit. It really is unfortunate, because the exploration in Starfield was advertised as the biggest feature, but unfortunately is the biggest disappointment. Bethesda is selling you on the idea of space travel and not actual space travel itself. You just gotta use your imagination, and look guys, you got it. But hey, that's just one core pillar of the game. We've still got two more. Story, the writing, and all the quests that you'll go on are just as important as exploration in a Bethesda game. Surely quite a bit of time must have gone into refining the story and the writing and the quests and all that, right? Starfield has got to have some of the most quests out of any Bethesda game. You can loop around one of the major cities and come back with like 5 or 6 quests to follow. It can feel a bit overwhelming at times, but I really wouldn't call that a bad thing in a game like this. Really, the only problem is that a lot of these quests are just kinda boring. It can definitely feel like quantity over quality at times, and that would make sense considering the amount of recorded dialogue in this game. Most of what you'll be doing can pretty much just be boiled down to fetch quests, and they get old pretty fast. But that's not to say that there aren't good side quests, because there absolutely are. You've even got your faction side quests, which have always been the highlight for me. I haven't done all the faction quests in Starfield yet, but from what I've experienced, they're pretty good. But I do have a problem with them, but we'll get into that in a little bit. For now though, I'm really not here to talk about the side quests, because it's just kinda your usual Bethesda fare. Most of my problems lie in the main quest. Honestly, at first I thought the main quest was pretty good, and on top of that, everyone had been saying it's the best main quest Bethesda had done, and God forbid I let myself have my own opinion, so it had to have been good. But within like 10 minutes of finishing the main story, I felt a strange sense of, that was mid as fuck. Then I thought about it more, and yeah, I'm not feeling it. The more I really gave the main quest thought, the more it just completely unraveled for me. Starfield's main quest presents itself as something more than it actually is. It portrays itself as a serious and emotional story about finding these mysterious artifacts and answering questions about humanity's place among the stars. And well, it's got the artifacts, but the entire story here just feels so shallow and once again, safe. There are no risks taken, only a handful of real big decisions to be made, and it feels like it rarely ever sets out to impress or surprise the player. There are like 3 moments I remember from the main quest: the Hunter attacking New Atlantis, exploring the old NASA facility, and that one dimension switching mission that Titanfall 2 did better. But that's kind of it. The whole quest itself also feels just so disconnected from the rest of the game. The side quests and everything all feel connected and a part of the same world, but the events of the main story feel like they're existing in just some kind of other like pocket dimension. The only time it felt connected and had any bearing on the world was when the Hunter attacked, because New Atlantis got pretty fucked up, and then it went back to normal. No one questioned who this mysterious guy using space powers was and why he was hunting Constellation. They just moved on with their lives. I'm so glad that the UCA government doesn't maybe, ask Constellation why that guy was attacking them or what they've been doing. It's also interesting to me that the government doesn't even remotely care about the fact that you have powers. In fact, no one does. I mean, you show the members of Constellation your abilities and they're like, whoa, that's cool, you have crazy powers. That's it. No one even thinks about the idea of your character possibly being evil or anything like that. Because you're the main character, you're the good guy. It would have been nice to maybe have a scene after the attack on New Atlantis where you and the other members of Constellation are interrogated about the attack. It's kind of an important thing. It could even play out differently if you've progressed in the UC faction storyline enough. Like maybe some grizzled old officer is like, I can't believe one of our new recruits was involved in this attack. It's things like this that would at least help the world feel alive to some capacity, but instead everyone just acts oblivious and pretends like nothing happens. None of these characters really even feel real. It's like you're playing through some shitty teen adventure story where everyone is squeaky clean and the main character is perfect with no consequences. On top of that, you have a multiverse story thrown in that really only exists for the New Game Plus gimmick. Seriously, that's kind of the only point. The Starborn is an interesting idea, but they're not given any time to flesh out or explore them. Nothing really happens. They're just a group of people apparently who have reached the center of the universe. I'd say that's pretty important to maybe explore. And hey, I'm more than fine with the story having mystery to it. I mean, that's what pulled me in and got me invested. What are the artifacts? Who made made them, but it doesn't feel like those initial mysteries are given any kind of payoff. The whole story feels like it really relies on the multiverse reveal and the New Game Plus gimmick. And of course, I'll give credit where credit is due. It's a cool as fuck gimmick, and Bethesda really runs with it. Most of the time, it'll just be new dialogue during quests that may let you skip some portions of the quest, but then they really take the idea of entering a new universe and completely run with it, with unique scenarios when you enter the lodge for the first time. For example, on my 10th New Game Plus, yes, I grinded that for some reason, I walked into the lodge to find me. My player character was just chilling there and everyone had a collective what the fuck moment, as now there are two of us. And the best part is, it's not just a quick little moment. I was able to recruit myself as a companion who has unique dialogue and everything. It was awesome. Although I'm not sure if you can romance yourself. But who cares? It's funny as shit abandoning all members of Constellation to just hang out with yourself. Sometimes you need to spend time with the realest one you know. This isn't the only thing that can happen. There are so many variations of that lodge sequence and I love it. It's just something I feel like I've never really seen a game do and I really want to give it praise here. It's a moment where Starfield surprised me. Wish I could say it did it more. Instead, we get a nice squeaky clean space adventure game that feels entirely sectioned off from the rest of the universe, along with also being a huge fetch quest. And what sucks is that the lore of Starfield is actually pretty interesting, and it makes you wish that instead we got a game set during the Colony Wars, set earlier in the timeline where humanity was actually at conflict and had cool shit like mechs and stuff. Don't create a very obvious alien and precursor civilization space mystery and then give it no proper payoff. Yeah, multiverse is cool, but hey, I'd still like to know what the fuck any of this is. Oh, hey, maybe they'll actually drip feed the rest of the story through DLCs. Yeah, can't wait to do this shit again. All right, I'm gonna get real armchair developer / writer here. So if you don't want to listen to that, just click off or skip ahead. Just go off because it's gonna happen. If there is anything I would change about Starfield's story, I would make factions much more central and make the artifact search much more of a wide-scale thing. The idea of powerful artifacts hidden around the galaxy would basically be a galactic gold rush for these major factions. Humanity itself has gotten so comfortable living among the stars too that news of potentially alien artifacts being found would completely shock everyone's worldview. I want to know how the government will react to this, how the Crimson Fleet would react, and even how the religious groups in Starfield's universe would react. Having this story be more faction central could at least help lead to this, along with still having the room to join no one and go for the artifacts yourself. Now, as for Constellation, I'd personally really play into the fact that the public has essentially forgotten about them and make them seem more like the, smaller and less important faction. But as you go further and further and do more missions to them, that's when it opens up and say, like the Starborn come in and you learn that Constellation is made up of these beings who watch from the shadows, or something like that. I just want Starfield's world to feel more alive. Like, oh hey, what happens if you lead the galaxy's most dangerous pirates to the center of the universe and ultimate power? Why not? At this point, I feel like I'm just describing a world where Obsidian made Starfield instead of Bethesda. I'm also really surprised that Bethesda didn't go for the faction-specific endings like they did with Fallout 4. And again, I'm in no way a writer. All of these ideas are just random thoughts I've had for a couple weeks now. None of them are perfect or really thought out, but it's what I would have preferred instead of what we got. Well, that's the second pillar of the game down, leaving one left I'd like to talk about. Combat. This is an aspect of the game that I won't be as negative about compared to the other two, but to me it's still got some big problems. Starfield's combat is essentially just upgraded Fallout 4 combat. For the most part, it feels fine. I like how the weapons feel, how they look, how they sound. It's actually pretty good. The biggest problem with the weapons is any lack of unique weapons. This game suffers from the Fallout 4 problem of uniques just being standard weapons with modifiers. I have yet to find a truly unique weapon in this game. It's all just reskins and new modifiers. This is at least an aspect of the game that could be fixed by updates and DLC, but it sucks that it has to be. Combat in Starfield also suffers from enemy variety. Sure, there are alien creatures, but for the most part, you're just gonna be fighting the same generic, boring human enemies. Like, come on, at least throw in a couple more enemy types to spice things up. Like, I don't know, big dude with a big turret or something, I don't know. Some kind of special unit for these factions? Something to like encourage the player to at least think and prioritize targets during combat? This game is set in space. I don't know why we're dealing with weapon and enemy variety problems. Why does this universe feel so stale? It must be the most boring place to live. Starfield also, of course, features the space powers, and I'll admit, I was incredibly excited for these. I mean, who wouldn't be excited for space powers? Come on. And they're fine. The biggest problem with the powers is how many there are and how you acquire them. Complaining about an abundance of powers in a game probably sounds insane, but so many of these just felt useless. Give me a handful of powers that I can really upgrade and build into. Then there's actually getting them. This is the best that Bethesda could come up with. Just flying around and touching orbs. Yep, real exciting stuff, guys. Again, give us fewer powers, but more unique ways of getting them. And the best part is that upgrading these powers is tied to going into New Game Plus and doing this shit again. There are 24 powers in Starfield. You'll need to upgrade a power 10 times to max it out. That means you gotta do 240 of these temples to max every power out. Oh hey, you don't want to go into New Game Plus and reset everything, but you want to upgrade a certain power and make it stronger? Fuck you. Time to reset everything. Oh well, at least when you get the slowdown time ability, you really won't need anything else. I feel like that's kind of all I've got for combat. It's really not bad, it's just meh, could and should have been better. That's how I feel about pretty much everything in Starfield. Well, even after all that, still feel like I haven't quite scratched the surface of what can be discussed about Starfield. There's just so much to talk about and go over and dissect that we would be here for God knows how long if I even dared to go over all of it. It'll be really interesting to see where Starfield stands in a couple years from now, because Bethesda is committed to it for a while. I'm sure in the future it'll be looked at more positively. Mods of course do play a part in this, and it does frustrate me that Bethesda apparently can't release games good enough to be played on their own, but I do think that mods are going to go unreasonably hard for this game, and they'll 100% keep me hooked. It's just sad that Starfield turned out this way, because I really was rooting for it. Todd Howard talked about this game like it was his literal dream project, and I was excited to play and experience it. But it's once again just full of so many decisions and problems that baffle me. I mean, seriously, what happened? I imagine plans for this game were very, very different back then. But unfortunately, for one reason or another, things didn't work out. Now we're left with not a bad game, but a very, very, very average one. I think that's gonna wrap up Starfield for now. If you made it this far, thank you. I encourage everyone to talk about this game in the comments and give me your takes. If you absolutely love the game, then let me know. I really want to hear it. Just, everyone, keep it civil. Please. Alright, that's it for now. I'll see you guys later.